And I'm now pleased to invite our second discussant, Dr. Saumya Saxena, to offer her comments and observations. Dr. Saxena, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Noman, for inviting me to this. And Somya, congratulations on an excellent and a very impressive doctoral research project. And I was also so happy to see it because it's so important and so significant in this day and age. And you've done such an excellent job. And some of my questions are also just general wonderings. And the bit on data I shared with Megan, so I'm not going to repeat it. I'm going to ask you the specific ones first, and then maybe the broader questions about the argument. So the specific one was, and you've partially answered it, is about the witnesses. Who are the witnesses in, because Special Marriage Act requires three as opposed to Hindu Marriage Act, which requires only two because religious marriage is, of course, like less suspect and all of that. And it does pervas. For instance, these are couples who are leaving town, they're leaving villages and moving to bigger cities to register their marriage, also to be away from families. So, do they have friends, or does Parvaz, are they in a position to basically also provide a witness? Because, for instance, if you read Solanki's work or Vatuk's work, in a lot of ways, what these NGOs are doing is they're also working with the legal process in very creative ways. So, are they in a position, if there is a couple who knows absolutely no one there, could they ask the clerk sitting around or the next couple waiting for the registration to act as witnesses? So, that was just the most specific question on how do they go about the technicalities of the Special Marriage Act. Now, Special Marriage Act, like you've recognized, has, there are, of course, procedural difficulties built into it and procedural difficulties that have evolved over time. So, for instance, the 30-day notice period was always there, but the no objection certificate and the affidavit, those are procedures that have come up within states because the state has kind of tightened its grip on interreligious marriage and the suspicion around it. And like you recognize that particularly the male, sort of part in this marriage is going to be vulnerable to all sorts of criminal cases like kidnapping and so on and so forth by the woman's side of the family. So in this case, how do couples feel? So for instance, we've also seen a lot of cases. Hadia, which you also mentioned in your abstract, was a case where religious conversion was just also the easier and the faster route than Special Marriage Act, right? Because the Maulvis are more likely to be like, okay, convert and you can do it, or Arya Samaji wedding that way is just a faster route to convert. But because of all of these, 8 states and now more kind of being added to that list of states kind of criminalizing interreligious marriage quite specifically, does that in one sense make Special Marriage Act kind of the law that people in this case really value? Because general disdain for law that we see when it comes to state surveillance and marriage is around personal laws, what families can do, how a high court, for instance, the structure of law itself would constantly reiterate things like parental consent in marriages, so on and so forth. But Special Marriage Act, despite its problems, becomes this kind of sort of space of hope for these couples, despite everything that comes with its procedure. So how do couples really? How does that shape their relationship with the law? Is it aspirational? Is it are they taking refuge under this law, or is there also a lot of suspicion around the state because of what the through and witnesses and where do they live and where do they spend those 30 days after which the registration happens? So I'm very curious to learn about the on the ground process of how these couples complete registration in the first 30 days when the state is literally on their case to find out what's going on. The more zooming out, the final kind of point which I was thinking about was the latest conversation that's now started in India around uniform civil codes, right? Which is about states enacting these neutral laws that will apply across religion. And of course, it's being sold as this idea that will do away with obscurantist practices of Muslim personal law and allow all people to kind of marry under it. But it's creating, of course, as we know, a new regime of surveillance, particularly in Uttarakhand. We have cases where couples are registering under it, and interreligious couples again, there is concern about their information leaking, so on and so forth. And the state in general is very hostile towards interreligious conversations. In this case, is there greater suspicion then around the law, or are people hopeful? at all, because it seems like this is Hinduization of the law as a whole. And in one sense, they've taken literal, the UCC of Uttarakhand is literal borrowing of the Hindu Marriage Act. Two-thirds of it is verbatim borrowed from Hindu Marriage Act. But is there any room for maneuver for these couples? Is there any scope of protection that these new laws offer for these couples that might attract them to these states, to or is it actually just as bad as it seems? I'll stop there, but congrats on an excellent project, and I do hope to read your book when it comes out.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saxena, for those thoughtful and illuminating comments. Your reflections have brought valuable legal and socio-historical dimensions to the discussion. Now let's get out of the South Asia, India, and see what's happening outside there on something, similar. And for that, let's go to Dr. Jawad. Dr. Jawad, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot anyway for inviting me. And the subject is fascinating. I think it has a potential, probably due to the fact that in recent years this kind of marriages have increased, whether in minority setting or majority settings. So it's very, very important topic, and I wish you all the best. I think I enjoyed reading and listening to your presentation. A few comments for me. It should not be just to make sure that everything is clear. It's first, why did you choose this topic, and why in India and within India is this state? This is very important, in my opinion. It would be good to explain that, and just a few explanation, because that will, in one way or another, help define the topic. There is as well, in my opinion, the issue of whether you are dealing with both genders or only one gender. So when you talk about, for example, interfaith marriages, was it to do with men marrying non-Muslim, non-whatever religion, or the other way around? Because this creates a problem and make life difficult for those women from, well, to some extent, from who come from a background that prohibit marrying to non, exactly as we said, like the Muslim women can't. You did mention can't marry non-Muslim men. So I was just wondering whether it is a good idea to explain that, because that will then again define and the subject, and make the subject is focus. Then there is the issue of which perspective you are looking at. Is it a theological perspective, sociological perspective, law perspective? I presume when I looked at the College of Law, so I thought it might be from a law perspective. But again, that needs to be, sort of identified, because then you will be able to identify the theoretical concept and the methodology to be followed, and even the samples to be followed. In the small abstract, you did mention that India allow, what is it? allows interfaith marriages primarily to preserve the spirit of Indian secularism. So, what does it mean that? It would be good to let me know, and in which way it differs from Western secularism, or for that matter, Turkish secularism. So I thought it would be good to, sort of explain that. There is the issue as well of whether you have looked at other examples. I don't know, maybe because you are working on a topic on India, whether Malaysia or Indonesia. But best example is actually is Turkey, because Turkey has a secular law, and the law, interestingly, doesn't care, doesn't ask similarities between religions. You could, you know what I mean? You could marry, in contrast to India, which of course prohibits that differences. So it would be good to have a look at the Turkish example, in my opinion. A topic on Muslim in general in India, because it's not clear to me. You talk about gender love, and then some organizations forces people to convert. So I was just wondering whether you really, it's a Muslim group, a Hindu Muslim group. All these needs to be defined. And good luck anyway.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Jawad, for your comments. And I think it makes me remind of a book written by someone whose name I forgot. They did compare Turkey and India in terms of the secular states and different paths they followed. But I forgot that. I will check and then I will send you, Somya. Let's zoom in again and go back to Diksha for the comments, both legal perspective and the geographic perspective. I think she's very much familiar with that. Diksha, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Saumya, I echo what everyone has to say about it's a brilliant project. It's so ambitious in scope, and I can only imagine how, how mentally difficult and challenging the fieldwork must have been, because you're just doing a very small part. For me, was very challenging. So this is really ambitious in scope. Um, just a couple of, I have lots of different comments and they're not very necessarily very related, but I think one thing that might be might help you is a question about methodology, which is that I think a lot of your project seems to be based on your experience of working with this NGO, Parvaz, right? But maybe you address this in your work, but I think it would be interesting to know why you chose this particular NGO, and how does their own internal politics and ideology play a role in how they approach couples and the broader role that they are playing institutionally among actors. Like it could be that you've had previous work experience with them or something, and that influenced your choice. But as someone now researching it, you also have to hold that position where you are in a critical position of them as well as kind of working with them. So how do you sort of stay apart as well as be involved, right? So, and why did you choose this particular NGO and their politics? The other thing I would say is, so your project is about the different object sites or emotions. That's how you kind of mention the category, the title of your project. But I'm wondering if at some point you have to choose a dominant one of them. Like, is it, because I think that might help you ground your methodology, because the methodology for, say, approaching this field through, say, objects might be a very different one. If you're approaching it more as a site, like let's say the NGO is the site and that's the space for different sort of interactions, then that becomes a different one. And if you're looking at emotions within law, then I think you might have to, use a different um, framework. Let me just put it that way. So while I think each of these are equally relevant and have, and obviously they're interconnected, I'm wondering if you think that at some point you might have to make a choice between object, sites, emotions, like what becomes the dominant spine, and then maybe you can address, the other categories within that. And yeah, so I think one, of course, like, do tell us about why you chose this NGO, what you think how you think what the role of the NGO is here, right? And if you've chosen them as a specific actor over, say, someone like lawyers and stuff. So that was something I wasn't very sure about in your project. So that might be useful to know. And then, completely unrelated to all of this, more about the substance of what you said, I was very curious about. So you said that you have looked at how do couples think about marriage, right? And that's something that you're looking at. And I was just wondering, and this is of course a little bit related to my own work, since I also look at live-in agreements as a part of just the way couples navigate. So I was wondering if you've noticed couples kind of blurring these categories as well, of like marriage and live-in, or if this is something that you've seen, because how important does marriage registration become? And have you seen that sort of, because you also said they use live-in affidavits, so I was curious if you've seen that sort of blurring at all. How much do they make a distinction between these processes? So there's also the work of Rama Srinivasan. I don't know if you've come across it, on Quoting Desire, where she talks about how the protection petition is itself a way of couples assuming that they are married, right? It becomes like a whole marriage making thing. So I was wondering if these kind of, have you noticed this sort of blurring in the work that you have been doing with couples? So yeah, I think I'll restrict it to that. But yeah, congratulations on your fieldwork being done, and all the best in putting it all together. It's fantastic.
Thank you, Diksha, for this legal perspective. Very it enriched the discussion. Without much ado, Somya, over to you. You're already short of time, so prioritize your questions. I'm sure I can see a lot of similarities and overlapping between the questions. So thematically, just give a response to them. And you don't need to answer all the questions, by the way. We fully recognize that it's a PhD in progress project. Over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Norman. I'd like to address the methodological questions first, that everyone's starting with Diksha. So why Parvas? I think the short answer to that is that they occupy a very unique position. I don't know organizations that are doing this work. Why Delhi? Because it's close to where I live. It's easier to do this work because initially I thought about being in a state that has enacted it, and I've visited UP a few times to do some research, and I realized how hard it must have been if it would have been if I had based myself in Allahabad or Lucknow, just culturally very distant places in terms of legitimacy of researcher coming from Delhi, from an upper middle class background with this short hair. I thought it would be a problem in Delhi. It wasn't. But in Allahabad, I had a very hard time. So a mix of factors influenced the decision to be with Parvas. Also because lawyers, it's hard to identify one lawyer who would do this openly. In some states you can do that. Here, some lawyers become prominent as people who are openly helping individuals in these kinds of situations, especially interreligious couples. But nobody does it as openly as Parvaz does on social media, their website. This is a political issue for them, and I wouldn't say they do it fearlessly. Of course, there's enough fear because of the kind of political dispensation we have, but they do it openly. And so as a field site, it became slightly easier to access. In terms of the number of people I spoke to, um, some of my interactions with couples began in the Parvaz office with people who came for a session and then went through the process. For example, one couple came in September last year in the middle of a very, very difficult situation where their marriage application had been made viral on a WhatsApp group, and goons had come to their respective homes. They had to flee the state, come back, fight a long legal battle in relation to what Somya asked about witnesses, who can be witnesses. So their marriage took about 7 or 8 months to finalize. Under the SMA, it should take no more than 3 months and can be done in a month. So I'm trying to count now, and I would say um, 4 couples who I've seen from beginning to end, in the sense they came to Parvas and I saw them getting married or separating and going home or not knowing what to do, but in that flux. Um, the snowballing led to other interviews. So I interviewed people who came to Parvas for help and were eventually sent back to their state and put in touch with somebody there. 2 couples in Jaipur, Rajasthan. Both went through horrible media trolling. So they one was fighting a sexual assault case, a fake sexual assault case for 6 years during their marriage, filed by the younger sister of his wife. So, two in Jaipur. Um, I've interviewed couples in Pune as well more recently, but it's hard to sort of, again, those are couples who came to Parvas and then were sent back to seek help from local actors in Maharashtra. Although I find them to be sort of like the world in Maharashtra for marriage making seems to be completely different, and I'm not sure how to reconcile the data I've collected from there with the rest of this, like in Delhi NCR. Um, some people didn't marry, went back, or they separated. And I've come across 3 such couples where, so I haven't done a count as such, but you get the idea. The number is small, but the interaction is prolonged with some of them. With the people that so as the case that took 8 months to solemnize. I haven't done a formal interview with them because I was there from the beginning to the end, and the number of conversations we've had. So I don't have anything to formally interview them for. And they know that every time we speak, I'm asking them questions, but it's always informal, and I go back and make my field notes. So it's been very different. But the people I've snowballed to, priests, lawyers, married couples, those interviews have been single. So earlier, the idea was to do life history interviews, and the first interview was always conducted with the objective of doing a life history interview. But it's so difficult to get time. Nobody is like they're all in the peripheries of Delhi. They're all busy with their jobs. Everybody is struggling to make money and run a household. Sometimes if they go back and live with their in-laws after marriage, then it's even more difficult to get access. So that is something I don't really know how to like deal with. But one long interview with all of these couples at least. So some interviews were 6 hours long because we just kept chatting, and they were okay with getting recorded while chatting. Some two, but like extended long in-depth, unstructured interviews, but I haven't been able to interview these couples more than once. Okay, so I'll come to the other questions that I can answer at the moment. Starting with Dr. Reed's, how would the experiences of Parvaz couples be different from those of non-Parvaz couples? I've only interacted with one and seen the marriage application and solemnization of one non-Parvaz couple. And I think the biggest difference was that they were able to navigate the law in non-legal ways, right? For an NGO to support a couple that is also bribing actors on the way, making fake identity documents because people have to. They don't always have all the identity or fake address proofs. It's I think puts the organization at a back on a back foot because it's the employment place of more than 20 people. They have to think about their reputation, and so they have to proceed with a lot of caution. And when one is not going through Parvas, they don't need to worry about that. They don't need to worry about doing everything legally. And I think that was the main difference, that money makes a huge difference to the whole equation. But it's really hard to say. So Dr. Jawad asked this question of, am I looking at like Muslim man, Hindu woman pairings only? But my interlocutors are mixed. Some are Hindu women, some are Muslim women in interreligious pairings, and in some cases, when a Muslim woman Hindu man pairing comes to Parvaz or anybody, their response is, "Oh, you will get married easily. You won't face trouble because these days trouble is faced only by Muslim men Hindu women pairings." But that's not true in practical experience. Not that I can comment on larger trends, and of course, the way in which hostility is articulated in the office of the marriage officer is there are hints of the love jihad rhetoric in that. Um, but I think hostility comes from multiple um, spaces, and it's not always coming from a place of Islamophobic rhetoric. And that is something that I have to make sense of while reading my field notes. I think I'll have to think about the questions that Professor Jawad has raised as a way of limiting, because the idea was to understand how to limit this. If I have to think about subjectivity and self-making, and I have to do it in relation to the law because I'm trying to do a legal research project, then how would I do that? By answering the many questions she has raised, I think, yeah, this gives me a lot to think about and process. And in the process of writing up, I'm very grateful to your questions. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Somya, for your responses. And I'm really glad that you found the exercise very useful. I think we are out of time, and I would have loved to give, the floor to our discussants and peer commentators for counter arguments and discussions. But in the interest of time, I think we have to stop here and allow me to conclude the session. So thanks again, Somya, for your thoughtful responses and for sharing this fascinating part of your doctoral research with us. Today's presentation and discussion have shown the value of examining interreligious marriage not only through legal rules and institutions, but also through the everyday sites, objects, emotions, relationships, and bureaucratic encounters through which marriage making is experienced and negotiated. The comments from our discussants and peer commentator have added important sociological, legal, historical, religious, and socio-cultural perspectives, and have raised a number of valuable questions for the future development of the project. On behalf of the Global South Network, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to our presenter, Saumya Maheshwari, our discussants, Dr. Megan Reed, Professor Saumya Saxena, and Dr. Haifaa Jawad, and our peer commentator, Diksha Sanyal, for their generous and constructive contributions. I would also like to thank everyone who joined us today and participated in the discussion. Your questions and reflections have contributed greatly to the intellectual richness of the session. This brings the 27th online seminar of Phase 5 of the Global South Network PhD in Progress seminar to a close. Thank you all once again, and I wish you a very pleasant rest of the day. Bye bye.